show, Community Resources. This evening, I've got a special guest with us, Dave Haskell, that is with Lahey Behavioral Health. Dave's been a guest on the show before, and welcome this evening.
Thank you.
Tonight, we're actually talking to our audience, specifically parents, and we're going to touch upon a little bit in regards to parenting adolescents, some of the important topics in regards to parenting, and some of the issues that we're probably dealing with in raising adolescents in our community, and we hope you will enjoy our show. One of the things that we wanted to try to start with is stages of development. I think that a lot of parents do not necessarily understand brain development, and our adolescents are really wanting to separate, which is really actually a very normal thing in stages of development. And if you want to talk a little bit about brain development, that would be, I think, helpful.
Good. Well, I think first, it's really, really hard to be an adolescent, and it's really, really hard to be a parent of an adolescent. And so a couple of things that I think is helpful is that it's normal for an adolescent to be pushing away. Right. Just as it's normal for a child to begin to walk and is going to walk in some dangerous places, it's normal for an adolescent to feel as if they know more than their parent, that they're smarter than their parent, that and to be trying on different sort of images because they need to be different. And I think if parents reflect back in their own lives, they might find times when they were very different than their parent and then shocked when they discovered as they got a little older. Like I was a messy kid, but as I became an adult, I realized I was incredibly organized and neat. And that wasn't imposed upon me by my family, but that was how my father was. And I grew up and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm just like him. I want my car perfectly this way. And
right.
So it's normal for the teenager to be pushing away and trying on different things to see what feels right.
Yep.
That doesn't feel good to the parent, to be told they're an idiot or you don't know anything or you don't trust me. So that's one piece that's normal. The other piece is that we've now figured out or begin to understand that the front of our brain, which deals with impulsivity and sort of making good, safe judgment calls, that part of the brain is not fully developed until somewhere in the 20s.
And the average parent, I think, thinks that your adolescent is fully developed at 18-ish.
Right.
When really we know now that it's more early 20s. Specifically, it could depend on your child as far as did they have any delays in development when they were younger, and are they kind of catching up? Some kids could be a year ahead of that, a year behind that.
Oh, and I think the adolescent thinks they've got it figured out at 15.
Yeah.
Perfect example of this is that if you look at driving, okay, children acquire the privilege at 16, but and they're totally capable of understanding safety issues of driving, of all the responsibilities.
Yep.
And yet they make impulsive, quick decisions, and their rate of accidents are much higher.
Yep.
So the part of the inconsistency is the child can intellectually understand, and they can even be relatively consistent in coming home on time, making a lot of good decisions. But almost no adolescent can be 100% consistent. And so a lot of parents then invalidate the 80, 90% of the time that their kid's making good decisions. And that's a delicate balance for a parent to recognize how do you keep your child safe and recognize most of the time they're going to make good decisions, but they're not going to be able to make 100% of the time good decisions. So what does a parent do as a result?
Well, and they're new at it. You know, one of the things that I've found working with the Department of Children and Families and doing adolescent work for 12 years, I think that parents tend to struggle with another adult in their child's life. And I've heard parents say this, you know, to me many times before. I've been saying that to them for years. Why is it that you say it and for some reason it's stuck, or they're open to that. And, really I kind of welcome parents to be okay with that. It might hurt the pride a little bit, but the reality is, you and I have talked about this as far as kind of building in a support and building in a community for your adolescent to be able to have their own resources, as long as it's healthy and positive. And that usually looks like family members. It could be another parent, it could be an aunt, it could be an uncle. Sometimes it is a friend. But, we're talking with
Absolutely.
another adolescent, but those people are available to our youth. How do we tap into that? How do we be okay with that? Because I think that some parents
Right.
struggle with that too.
Well, that's a piece of the separating. They
Right.
don't want to listen to their parent. They don't
Right.
want to hear it from their parent, but they're open to another person.
Yeah.
And so part of the challenge, or part of what you want to help your child to develop, is a community of other resources other than their peers. I mean, a good, solid, good friend is very important for a lot of other reasons, but it isn't through peers that you want kids to be learning about sex
Right.
and drugs and a lot of dangerous things. You want relationships. You want them to have an aunt, an uncle, a cousin,
Yeah.
a mentor, somebody that they can bounce some ideas off of. The closer you are to them,
Yep.
the more you're going to hear about it. Another little trick that isn't exactly the same, but if you can put your kids in the back seat and don't say anything, you'll learn more. If they're just talking to their friends, they'll forget you're there. But you want, back to what you're saying, is your kids teenagers tend to not want to listen to their parents, but they are open to listening to others, and that's a natural development piece. But here's the weird part. You also want to keep the relationship open so that when they make a bad decision at a party, when they're drunk, or when something is going wrong, you want to make it so that you're the first call, that
Yeah.
they're not going to be so punished or so shamed that they're going to get in a car with a drunk driver, but that they know that they can call you and say, yep, shouldn't have been at this party or shouldn't be out, but I don't have another way home.
Yeah.
Can I get a pass on that tonight? And maybe
Yeah.
we'll talk about why I was at the party in 2 weeks or next week.
Right. And I think that we were talking earlier about how do we pick our battles?
Right.
And the more important things around safety concerns, when we are talking about what adolescents are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, they are now outside of your four walls, they're in society. This is new to them. For a lot of parents, you may not have ever raised an adolescent before, so this is new for the parent in this role particularly. One adolescent is not necessarily like the other one was if you have had some experience with adolescents. So, there's a lot of new experiences, experimentation that has to do with that development, that independence, and that separation, that if we're constantly, like you're saying, kind of at their heels and
Right.
picking, opposed to, wait a minute, what do I really need to focus on that has much more to do with my child's safety out in the community and the ability for them to make good decisions and yet turn to me when they're not. So how do we, give assistance with those pieces of
Right.
picking our
Well,
battles?
A couple of things is, what I've found with my kids is there are moments where they are open to a conversation. So whenever that moment is, you want to take advantage of that, and you want to talk about what's most important. And that is that you love them, and that you want them to be safe, and that it is normal for children and adults, for everyone, to end up in not good situations. And no matter what, you want them to know that they can call you, that you're going to love them, and that you're going to do whatever is needed to protect them at that moment.
Yeah.
Whatever other issues are there, whether it's drugs, law, sexual, whatever it happens to be, you'll deal with that second.
Yeah.
The most important thing is you want that child to call you rather than to be in a position where they have to make a compromising decision.
Yeah.
The second is, and it really varies from family to family, culture to culture, but you, as much as possible, want to be able to have conversations about sexual issues, relationship issues, suicidal issues, drug issues, internet issues. I'm not sure what that is, but there's a half a dozen to a dozen pretty important, driving, stressful things. And you want to be able to be honest with your children. And if you aren't comfortable, you want to provide an opportunity where they can talk to someone, whether that be a therapist, a minister, an uncle. I know in my case, I couldn't talk to my mother about certain things, so my father was. So they sort of
Right.
played good guy, bad guy with
yeah.
me. You know, not everyone has two parents. Anyway, so if the parent can't be it, you want to sort of help your child find an adult resource to talk about some of those difficult things. I know you wanted to talk about, many people want to talk about suicidal thoughts,
Yep.
because it's in some ways trickier with teenagers in that there is some normalcy to get to feeling overwhelmed and depressed. In these stages of development, there's also huge hormonal changes as they're developing physiologically into adult bodies,
Right.
both for boys and for girls. And so yeah, putting all that into the picture, parents need to know that it's normal, that they have some pretty dark thoughts, and yet, what do you do with it? And I think what you were saying is first you want to ask some very specific questions of, are they feeling unsafe? How frequently? Do they have a plan?
Yeah, you know, this is a conversation that I think is very taboo. It's very difficult for people to kind of break the ice, so to speak. And this is not just for a parent of a child, but it's for anybody, any family member. And the model that the Department of Public Health has is question, persuade, refer.
Slow that down. Question, persuade.
QPR stands for question, persuade, refer.
Okay.
So the elements to that is a child may be making direct or indirect statements. A child may actually come right out and say, I want to die.
Right.
There could be something that is so overwhelming for them in that life and in their life that, you know, sometimes that's relationships right now.
Right.
Because that's where they tend to struggle with that opposite sex or same sex, or if you've got a youth that's going through some LGBTQ issues, which is lesbian,
Right.
gay, bisexual, transgender issues, what does that look like for them in a very, you know, internal way and yet a very social way that they could be struggling extremely in the community that you're not even aware of some of those dynamics. So that's usually our most common piece, that you may have a child making a statement like that, or you may have a child making a very indirect statement in regards to, you know, I just don't know where I can, you know, fit in, and I just don't want to be on this earth anymore, and, you know, kind of things like that. When you're hearing that, I think we really should kind of pipe up and take some notice. And I think that the average parent can also kind of say that there's something about those statements that even leaves them a little unsettled and kind of has us, you know, pausing for a moment, but I don't think that we tend to know what to do about that. First thing to do is start questioning them.
Right, and if I can just interrupt you, I make it really clear to my kids and to all of my parents that their primary job is to keep their child safe. And it's important for children to hear that.
Yeah.
Because they may not like that you're asking the question, but they actually like the boundary that, ooh, my parent wants to keep me safe. I don't have to like that they're saying
Absolutely.
be home at X hour, but they
Yep.
are focused on safety. That's a good message to send your kid.
Yep.
That I want to make sure you're safe. So I know you don't want to, but I need to ask you some questions.
Right, right. And you know, that uncomfortability about the question, it really can be so simple as, I heard, you know, there can be compassion about it. It doesn't have to be a sense of urgency in regards to shock. You know, I think that shock and awe tends to kind of put our adolescents off even more. But it can be from a place of compassion in regards to, wow, you know, I really heard what you just said, And I want to ask you, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Are you feeling like you want to die? You know, those are some questions that we can ask our kids that isn't so putting off. And believe it or not, the most common response to some of those direct or indirect statements, and not that it's not out of compassion or affection, but not knowing how to breach this conversation in those questions, we tend to kind of come out with, "You're not thinking of doing something stupid, are you?" Right. You know, so, you know, think about that if you do have your child making some sort of statement that kind of has you a little put off or not understanding or a little bit concerned around that type of topic. And the persuasion part of that is to really come at that from the angle of the compassion and the love as a parent.
Right.
Absolutely.
And it's related, but somewhat related, but one other, you know, adults, children, we speak in behavior and in language. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the language is drug use. Mm-hmm. Because not always, but many times the drug use is an inability to deal with your emotions. And so it's a not feeling of emotion. So if you discover or sense that your children are all of a sudden using a lot of drugs, the issue may not be as much the drugs as why the drugs.
Right.
And
right.
So again, it's a really good message. Not that every child wants to hear it, but I love you, I care about you, I want to keep you safe, I want to understand. Tell me what's feeling so overwhelming, or mm-hmm. what's creating anxiety. Mm-hmm. Is it school? Is it relationships? Is it our family? What is it? But it is to allow the flow of that conversation.
Yeah. And this is where our community resources play into this as well. You know, if you're questioning your child about these things, if you're having that dialogue in regards to, I'm your parent, I'm here to keep you safe, I love you, I can't imagine not having you in my life, in our families' lives. Research really does show that most people that are thinking about suicide or that may actually have a plan for suicide, no one actually asks them the question, right down to a doctor, a teacher, a parent, a friend. So we want to make sure that we're okay with asking that question. The next part of that persuasion is, like you said, expressing those pieces. And that next part is refer. That's where you can tap into the community. I actually have a Samaritans hotline that you can actually find the Samaritans at 1-877-968-8454, and I believe we may actually have it on the screen. That is very specific for teens. Again, the number is 877-968-8454. And then, you know, if we've got an adolescent that is potentially using drugs, alcohol, you've got a concern about that, we've got a resource in town as well for that. The team coordinating agency is something that'll be scrolled at the very end of the show. There's a program that is very specific to adolescents. That is the Adolescent Soap program. We use a lot of acronyms, so Adolescent Soap stands for Adolescent Structured Outpatient Addiction Program, and that's at the Team Coordinating Agency. Signs that we can look for, you know, I think around some of this stuff, average stuff, withdrawal, isolation, a dramatic change in friends, a dramatic change in attitude, I think is another thing. I think we know when something might be off, and our suggestion to parents is, let's not ignore that. Let's not wish it to go away or think that it's just a part of development. Correct. Or a stage. Correct. And really be able to kind of open up the dialogue, open up the conversation. If you as the parent is uncomfortable or unable to kind of do that, and part of what we're saying is, let's find somebody else within your own family, within your own unit, within your own community. We really do have plenty at our fingertips that we can do that.
Right, and the most most extreme or whatever, everyone needs to know that they can call emergency services and they will do a crisis eval. These are people that, this is what they do for a living,
Right.
and they ask all the really tough questions. It isn't, ideally it's a conversation that's evolving with supports in the community. But I can tell you that therapists all the time and parents all the time, TCA, they call emergency services when they hear children say frightening things. The one thing, no one wants to be the expert of determining whether someone is truly suicidal.
Right.
When you get to that point, you want to call emergency services.
And that's the referral.
Right.
Whether it's an emergency room, whether it is an outreach and a crisis intervention person that is actually able to come to you, because those are things that we do have available in the community. But, we've said this on the show before, 911 is always, the safest bet when you are in the middle of a crisis situation. And this may happen with drug use. This may happen around issues of suicide. These are issues that they are seeing and dealing with in their home and with their kids every day.
Well, one of the shifts in the last couple of years in terms of emergency services is that they will come to your house.
Right.
In the Merrimack Valley area, it's from 8 in the morning till midnight. After midnight, I think it's rarer that they have someone that'll come. But they'll come to your house and talk to you, the parent, and you, the child, and do an assessment. And more often than not, what that ends up doing is first helping a parent to feel that their child is safe and getting another set of eyes. But then also, the majority of the work is actually in, okay, what's the next appropriate step? Do they need to go to a SOAP program? Do they need a therapist? Do they need a mentor? What do they need? Music lessons. I mean, it's someone else that's listening to that child, because some children don't talk, but they sing, or they play football, or they play music.
Yeah.
But everybody needs a way of expressing their feelings. We're accustomed to writing and words, but that isn't really necessarily the best for all people.
Yep.
And so then you've got an expert that's listening to that child, making sure they're safe, and then at the end, making some recommendations of, it might be family therapy, it could be anything. But you've got another expert that's saying, your child's safe tonight, and here are some potential things that you might want to be considering, what you would call the referral process.
Yep, yep. Now, when we talk about, picking our battles, the day-to-day in, your home and transporting your child to and from the mall and the movies and friends' homes and potentially, parties and get-togethers, this is part of adolescence. What advice can we give that is probably the best around this day-to-day? What's worth actually having some sort of disagreement with your child, or really kind of, staying on them? We're talking about the issues around safety. I've seen so much. This is a time, I think, where the adolescent has developed enough and been outside of your four walls enough and in society that they're seeing other families function. They're seeing, and for the good and for the bad, they're seeing friends that have no supervision. They're seeing friends that have much more strict parents. So that worldview is starting to come into the picture. I think kids start calling parents to the carpet. Right. So if we're kind of saying, hey, this is what our expectations are of you, don't be surprised that they're kind of coming back and saying, well, really, this is my expectation of you. And, how do we gauge that? What is worth kind of having those?
Well, I think every family is different. Every culture is different. There are no set answers. I do think, for me, I think it's important that every child be reminded throughout their life that their parents' number one job is safety.
Yeah.
Then, when you move beyond safety, what I find is, for many adolescents, really helpful is the issue of trust. What they want is freedom and trust. So how do you earn it? So I can't tell you how many, I don't know, hundreds of conversations I've had with teenagers about the difference between being 5 minutes early and 5 minutes late. And it's hard for them to really get that issue.
Yeah.
But if you're 5 minutes early, you gain trust. If you're 5 minutes late, then the
start losing
parent's
it.
going through all the emotional, all the scary things are running through their head.
Yeah.
So I find that if parents can have conversations with the children about how to gain trust and have conversations about earning trust and losing trust, and then the flip side, though, when you're talking about parents' accountability, is adolescents will always do things to lose trust. What they need is a road to how to earn it back. Because they're not going to be 100%. It goes back to that. They're not going to be.
And we need to be really concrete about that.
Right.
You know, a consequence, the more open-ended a consequence is, the more difficulty our adolescents are going to have with it. You know, we need to be able to say, grounded for the next 5 days. If A, B, and C take place, I may give you back a day. You know, I do think that we need to recognize how concrete, black and white, and the more open-ended that you leave it and non-negotiable that it is for an adolescent, I think the more struggle and the more difficulty you're going to see as the parent.
Absolutely. Here's a little trick I do in family therapy all the time. And it allows the parent to be setting consequences and boundaries and look like a good guy rather than a bad guy. And that is, I have the parents ask the child what's an appropriate consequence. And the majority of the time, the child will choose a consequence that is far stricter than the parent. And then the parent can say, well, you're right. I think this is very serious. And I think most of the time you're a great kid. So rather than 5 days, I think we're going to do 2 days or whatever it is. But the parent then is in a position to make the consequence, to acknowledge the significance, but to actually reduce the consequence based on goodwill.
Yeah.
And I love it when anytime a parent can acknowledge when a child's doing something right, you create energy around that. And
Yeah.
a child always wants to hear that they're doing well. So I think that's one piece, is being really clear on how to earn trust, how you lose trust, how you gain freedom. And I think that you really do have to separate that you're going to love them no matter what the behavior is. There may be behaviors you don't like, but you're always going to love them. And you're always going to go pick them up or get them to safety, even if they've made bad decisions. We'll deal with the bad decisions later. First, we're going to get you home.
Right.
The other thing, and this varies a little bit from family to family and stuff, but the more you can have activities in your home, the more you get to see what's really going on.
Right.
Right. And then the other thing that comes to my mind is kids that are busy, whether that's jobs or sports or music, but whatever the activity is, they tend to do better than kids that have just tons of free time.
Right.
So figuring out what is the right activity that excites your particular child, that's part of the challenge for you and your child. But the more they're involved in things, the more they're creating community. It doesn't matter so much what.
Well, and I think that we also need to demonstrate that. You know, it's kind of leading by example as well. You know, choose something to do in the community one-on-one. Choose something or an activity in the community that you can actually observe your adolescent with other adolescents. Like you said, kind of just being the innocent bystander, you'd be amazed how much you can pick up. You know, that may be a function that's taking place in downtown Haverhill, whether it's Kids Fest or, you know, being able to say, hey, you know what, let's go down there with 2 or 3 friends and, you know, you guys kind of do your own thing, but I'm going to be down there and, you know, we're going to leave at the same time. We'll meet up here. And, you know, I think that those pieces and those times, whether it's driving them to the movies, driving them to the mall, or some sort of activity, like you said, being that bystander that you're just kind of
I'm chuckling.
actively listening.
And I'm chuckling because I know a couple of parents that purposely pick up their kids or arrive like 15 minutes early and don't tell their children. And all they're doing is watching the peer interactions and
Right.
learning what's going on. They're not requiring their child to come early.
Yep.
They're just using that as an excuse to observe.
Right. Well, we are so pressed for time. We could talk about this, I think, for hours. It's something that we're both passionate about. One of the other resources that I wanted to give, there is a parental stress line. That is 1-800-632-8188. It can be very helpful. Again, it is a parental stress line, 1-800-632-8188. And for today's show, thank you very much for coming on. Again, I think that we might actually do another piece on adolescence because I think that there's still a variety of issues that we can touch upon: driving, drugs, sex, decision-making, quite a bit. So for this evening's show, I thank you for being here with Community Resources, and we look forward to seeing you in our next show. Thank you.
Thank you, Jody.
You're welcome.